Hi everyone, Dr. Sadaf Krishi here, and today we are going to talk about anterior cranial fossa. In last video we talked about cranial cavity and we learned that cranial cavity is divided into three parts: anterior cranial fossa that is located anteriorly, middle cranial fossa that is located medially, and the posterior cranial fossa that is located posteriorly. In this video we are going to talk about anterior cranial fossa in detail. So let's talk about anterior cranial fossa location and function. It is located in the frontal part of the skull and it provides a supportive base for the frontal lobes of brain. This fossa is involved in separating the brain from underlying structures such as nasal cavity and orbits through its bony floor. As we are going to talk about anterior cranial fossa, so here you can see the diagram of cranial cavity and the colored part of diagram is anterior cranial fossa. In next video we will talk about middle cranial fossa in detail, and in next video we will talk about posterior cranial fossa in detail. But as we are going to talk about anterior cranial fossa in detail in this video, so we are going to focus on that part, the colored part or the anterior part of cranial cavity, that is anterior cranial fossa. So we will start our topic by the first thing, that is what are the bones that contribute to the anterior cranial fossa. So this is the enlarged diagram of cranial cavity that is showing the anterior cranial fossa, the colored part. So the bones contributing to anterior cranial fossa are frontal bone, ethmoid bone shown in purple color, and sphenoid bone shown in orange color. So overall we can say that bones contributing to anterior cranial fossa are three. The first one is frontal bone, the second one is ethmoid bone, and the third one is sphenoid bone. Now moving forward, and we will talk about the boundaries of anterior cranial fossa. So the boundaries of anterior cranial fossa are formed anteriorly by inner surface of frontal bone. Posteriorly the boundary is by sharp lesser wing of sphenoid bone, and medially the boundary is by the ethmoid bone. If we see the median part of posterior boundary, it is by optic chiasma. So moving forward, and we will talk about the floor of anterior cranial fossa. Floor of anterior cranial fossa is formed medially by the cribriform plate of ethmoid bone, posteriorly by the lesser wing of sphenoid bone, and laterally by the orbital plates of frontal bone. And these orbital plates of frontal bone makes the major portion of the floor of anterior cranial fossa. They are called orbital plates of frontal bone because below them there is orbital cavity, and that's the reason they are called orbital plates of frontal bone. The floor of anterior cranial fossa appear irregular due to impressions of sulci and gyri in the frontal lobe of brain. Now we'll talk about the features of anterior cranial fossa. The first feature we can see in anterior cranial fossa is frontal crest. It gives attachment to phalanx cerebri. Next feature we are going to talk about is crista galli. It is basically sharp upward projection of the ethmoid bone, and it is triangular projection, and it is for the attachment of phalanx cerebri. Next feature we are going to talk about is cribriform plate of ethmoid bone. As you can see here in the diagram, it is present alongside the crista galli. It is sieve-like plate. As you can see in the diagram, there are many holes in the cribriform plate of ethmoid bone, so that's the reason it is called as sieve-like plate. And these holes are for the passage of olfactory nerve, that is cranial nerve number 1. It also supports olfactory bulb that are present just above them. Next we will talk about jugum sphenoidale, that is the feature of anterior cranial fossa. It lies on the superior surface of sphenoid bone. It is anterior to sella turcica, and it is between the two lesser wings of sphenoid bone. It forms the anterior part of the roof of sphenoid sinus. Next we will talk about the foramens of anterior cranial fossa. That what are the foramens that are present or located in the anterior cranial fossa. The first foramen we are going to talk about is foramen cecum. It is present behind the frontal crest. Cecum means blind, so no structure passes through it. But in 1% population have patient foramen cecum, and then it passes nasal emissary vein. The next foramen in anterior cranial fossa is anterior ethmoidal foramen. It gives passage to anterior ethmoidal artery, anterior ethmoidal vein, and anterior ethmoidal nerve. The next foramen we are going to talk in the middle anterior cranial fossa is middle ethmoidal foramen. It gives passage to middle ethmoidal artery, middle ethmoidal vein, and middle ethmoidal nerve. The next foramen we are going to talk about is posterior ethmoidal foramen. It gives passage to posterior ethmoidal artery, posterior ethmoidal vein, and posterior ethmoidal nerve. So this was all about anterior cranial fossa. We talked about anterior cranial fossa in detail, all the about the floor, boundaries, bones contributing, and foramens and features of anterior cranial fossa. In next video, we will talk about middle cranial fossa in detail and posterior cranial fossa in detail. So if you liked our video, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and comment. Thank you so much for watching.